Hey everyone, it's Lynette, and today I will be reviewing all three books in A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Part of this review, I won't have any spoilers at all. It will just be a brief synopsis of the story in the first book and a few general points about it in case you're interested in reading it. And then I will give you plenty of warning of when the spoiler section will come, because these books are so in-depth and so well written that I have so many thoughts about them that I have to express, and I just have to get it off my chest. So there will be a spoiler section, but I will give you plenty of warning to X out of this video if you do not want to hear spoilers. I also have to say a big thank you again to all of you on BookTube who recommended this series and who said what a beautiful world it was and a beautiful story, and that everyone should read this book, because without those recommendations I would not have picked this series up. I am new to the fantasy genre. I don't typically read a ton of fantasy, although I'm branching more into that genre, but I completely love this series. I gave all three books 5 stars, so if that gives you any indication of how this video is going to go. But I absolutely love this story. I love the world. I love the characters. So BookTube, thank you once again for recommending this story to me, because without you, I never would have picked this up. I never would have read it, and I never would have fell in love with it as much as I have. With all that being said, let's start with the first book, which is A Court of Thorns and Roses. Brief synopsis about this. It takes place in a world where there's humans and fairies and magic. And just a disclaimer, I've mentioned this in other videos of mine, but when I'm reading the brief synopsis inside a book or on the back of a book when I'm in the bookstore and choosing whether or not to purchase it, any mention of fairies or anything mystical or magical or supernatural, with the exception of Harry Potter, I shy away from. I never really got into the fairy trend. I don't know, I never really tended to read books about fairies, so I didn't know that this series was about fairies when I originally bought it and decided to read it. But I'm so glad that I went out of my comfort zone and read this book anyway, despite there being fairies in it. So if fairies is something that turns you off to a book, don't let it discourage you, because it is such a beautiful world, and I can't express that enough. But a brief synopsis of the story. It revolves around a girl, a human girl named Farrah, and she lives in the human world. This is very close to this invisible wall which separates the human world from the fairy realm. Humans and fairies don't tend to get along. Years ago, like centuries ago, fairies used to have human slaves, and so there's still a lot of distaste and distrust between the two species. Humans tend to fear fairies, and there's just a whole mess of complications between the two species. So Farrah is very much against fairies. She's a huntress, and so she's out in the woods hunting for her family. She's the one that provides for her family. She kills this wolf, which happens to be a fairy in his wolf disguise or wolf transfiguration, and she kills it. That kickstarts this whole chain of events. Tamblyn comes to her house. He's a fairy. He's actually one of the high lords of the fairy realm, so he's very important and very high ranking. And he comes and says she can either die for her crime of killing one of his men, or she can come live with him in the fairy realm. Now, it's known that once a human crosses into the fairy realm, they don't come back, typically because they are killed or lost, or something dangerous and scary gets them in the forest when they're crossing the wall. So Farrah goes back with Tamblyn and decides she would rather live in his mansion in the fairy realm rather than die. So you get this very much this Beauty and the Beast-esque type of story. Although I wouldn't consider it a Beauty and the Beast retelling, it's just loosely based on the classic fairy tale of Beauty and the Beast. But I wish I could say more about the book, but I can't really say more without giving away too many plot points or spoilers. But that's basically what you need to know going into the book about fairies and humans and the basic plot line of this story. I do have to make a comment on Sarah J. Maas's writing style because I am absolutely in love with it. It was such a beautiful writing style. It was so poetic and descriptive, and I love books that I feel like I'm watching a movie inside of my head as I'm reading, and that's exactly how I felt with these books. Her writing style was just so impeccable and so delicious, and I don't know that I have anything to compare it to. It was one of the best writing styles that I've ever had the pleasure of reading. So from A Court of Thorns and Roses, you go into the second one, which is A Court of Mist and Fury. This continues on. This takes place 3 months after the events of the first book, but it continues on in the story. I don't want to give you a synopsis of the second one because it will give away way too much, but I will tell you that it was beautifully written as well. The story just gets more complex and the characters get more developed, and it was just a really beautiful read. A lot of people say that the second one is their favorite. I don't know that I agree with that. I did really enjoy the second one, but I personally really love the third one. But the second one is great, and they're all very lengthy reads. It will take you quite a few days to get through, especially if you have a life outside of reading or work or school or whatever, but they are definitely worth the read. And the final book is called A Court of Wings and Ruin, and I believe this came out this past spring, so it's been out for several months now. But this picks up exactly where the second one leaves off. It continues on the story. Again, I don't want to give you a synopsis because I don't want to ruin any of the delicious plot lines or anything about this book. I don't want to give any spoilers quite yet. But this book, again, was beautifully written. It was probably my favorite of the three. I sobbed like a baby at the end of this book. I don't typically cry while reading books. There's only a handful of books that I can recall that I've ever cried with. But this was one of them, and it's just, there were some characters that you either had forgotten about or just assumed that they were gone, that had come back, and it was so beautiful in the way that it was all done and written. So I really highly enjoyed the third book. To sum up the first part of this video without giving any spoilers away, if you are wanting a new fantasy series to read, or if you're brand new to the genre like I was, I highly recommend this series of A Court of Thorns and Roses to you. It's a beautiful story. It has beautiful characters. You will absolutely fall in love with the world. I highly recommend it. It is definitely worth the money. So now I'm going to get into the spoiler section of this. So if you haven't read this series and you would like to, and you don't want to know any spoilers, then stop watching right now. I mean it. Stop it. If you're still with me, I hope that means you already read the series and are entering into the discussion forum with me. And if you are still watching and you haven't read the series, I'm warning you, you will spoil the series for yourself if you keep watching this video. But that's my last warning. This is the spoiler section. Let's start with the first one, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I thought that I really liked Tamblyn. I'll be completely honest with you. I know that there are some people that say that they didn't like Tamblyn from the start, that his and Farrah's romantic relationship was unhealthy, and I do agree with that. But I really kind of held out hopes that he was a good person. And I think deep down Tamblyn is a good person. I think he had good intentions, but he just didn't really know how to go about showing them or displaying them to Farrah. I don't think he protected her at all under the mountain. That's when I started to realize that there was something amiss between Tamblyn and Farrah, is when they were under the mountain. I really saw Tamlyn's true colors under the mountain. And as soon as Rhys showed up, I just knew that I was going to love him, especially since Farrah was like, he's the most beautiful man I've ever seen. I was like, okay, there's our love interest. There's the guy that I'm gonna like. But Tamblyn, I really did thought he had potential. I really sort of was pulling for him. I was actually mad that Farrah, when he finally let her go and let her go back home to the human realm, I was actually sort of upset that Farrah didn't turn around and say, I love you too. But I'm glad now that she didn't, because of course the story just would have ended right there. The curse on Tamblyn would have been broken and none of the events under the mountain would have happened. And if the under the mountain wouldn't have happened, then we would have never gotten the love interest and the romantic relationship that we all crave. And of course that is between Farrah and Reis. So I think that's enough spoilers for the first one. That's really all my thoughts given the events in the first one. But the second book, I think a lot of people think that the second is their favorite because it really goes deeper into Reis, and you get to watch him and Farrah's relationship blossom and bloom. And it starts off really rocky. I mean, it starts out that she does not like him at all. So I sort of love that he had to win her trust and earn her trust. And one of my favorite aspects of their relationship that was so polar opposite of her and Tamblyn's relationship is that Reis gave Farrah complete control over everything. If it wasn't her decision, or if she didn't want to do it, she didn't have to do it. Or if she was gun-ho about doing something, if she was gun-ho about going right into the face of danger for the sake of their land and their peoples, he was all for that too. He supported her in whatever decision she made, whether he thought it was a good or bad one, because he knew he wasn't going to be able to talk her out of it. That's something that I love about Farrah, is that she's so headstrong, but in a good way. She's so independent and she's forward thinking and she's just her own person. So I love that Farrah's character didn't depend upon her romantic relationships, as a lot of times you see in young adult fiction. I feel like her and Reis were great together, but they were also great as individuals. And I feel like they were just better people in general because they brought out the best of each other. They brought out the best qualities of one another, and I love that about them. I have to say, Reis and Farrah's relationship is probably one of the healthiest relationships I've ever read about in a young adult fiction novel. You always see these sort of heroine type characters that their whole world depends upon this love triangle, or their whole world depends upon who they're with, and their character is defined by their significant other. But that was not the case with Farrah, and I really appreciated that. I really appreciated that she was strong and independent in her own right, and she was her own person. But with Reis, he just brought out better qualities in her. I mean, he kind of enhanced what was already good about her. So I think that's enough about Farrah and Reis. I could make an entire video about how much I love the two of them. But this book goes more into developing that relationship and how she discovers that she is his mate, which she wasn't very keen of that at first. I mean, I think she was more mad about the fact that he hid it from her for so long, but I really appreciated that he let her come into that knowledge on her own. Like, he let her take her time processing that. She went away to that cabin. She needed some time away. And I feel like he really let her have that space to breathe and to process and to get her head wrapped around it. Because obviously there was no changing it. But the events that happen in this book, you can tell, obviously we're building up for a giant war. The king of Hybern is building his army. He has the cauldron. When he kidnapped Farrah's sisters, I was like, oh gosh, all hell is breaking loose now. And that was such a terrifying scene. I mean, just seeing people that you love being tormented in that way and thrown into the cauldron. But I love that the cauldron transformed them into sort of the people they were always meant to be. I mean, like, I love that when Nesta came out of the cauldron, she was even more fierce and even more badass, even though her and Elaine did go through this period of depression, which we see more in the third book. I just really loved the transformation of the sisters, even though that was such a terrifying scene and such a heartbreaking scene. But I really loved that it just sort of enhanced the people that they were already and enhanced these qualities in them. But something else I want to talk about in the second book is the very beginning. Because this one leaves off after the events of what happened under the mountain. And that was such a traumatic experience for Farrah. And I love that Sarah J. Maas didn't gloss over that fact. I love that Farrah did go through this period of depression. I mean, anybody would be changed by the fact that they went through something so traumatic and so just death-defying. So I love that she wasn't the same person, because I would have thought it was really fakey if she came back and she was like Farrah again, if she was just the same person. I think the reader would have seen right through that, and I'm glad that Sarah J. Maas didn't gloss over the fact that yes, this was a traumatic experience, and yes, she is a different person now. And I really did lose respect for Tamblyn, because he didn't see this change in Farrah, this person that he's supposed to love so much. He didn't notice the red flags, that she was just spiraling into this deep, dark depression that she couldn't pull herself out of, that she wasn't the same person, and that she needed his help. So I just, like, my heart leapt when Reis finally showed up at the wedding, you know, in the nick of time, and rescued her and called in on their agreement. So I'm so thankful that he did that, because she needed that. She needed a change of scenery, even if it was the dreaded night court and all these horrible things that she heard about the night court. You know, even if it was there, she needed to get away from spring court, and she needed a break from Tamblyn. So I really love that Sarah J. Maas did not gloss over the fact that there was something wrong with Farrah, and she needed to come to terms with what happened to her. So now the third book starts out with Tamblyn thinking that Farrah was under Reis mind control, but really she is now the High Lady of the Night Court, and he is leading a spy directly into his court. I was nervous that Sarah J. Maas was going to take way too much time away from Reis. I do not like Farrah and Reis not being together, so I had a hard time sort of getting into this one, just because I kept wanting her to be back at the night court. I wanted her to go home. I didn't want her to be in the spring court anymore. I wanted her as far away from Tamblyn as she could get, but luckily, it was only like the first 100 pages, and then Reis shows up, and everything is good again, and they are reunited. But I'm glad that she wasn't away from Reis for very long, because like I said, I just hate that they were apart, and I love Reis so much that I just want to read about him all the time. His character is one of my favorite all-time characters. He is so developed and so complicated, and he has so many, he calls them masks. You know, he has to be the high lord of the night court and the court of nightmares, and then in the court of dreams he's a completely different guy, and he's more low-key, and he's more relatable and friendly and happy. So I love that he has to wear all these different masks, but I love at the point in the book where all the masks come off and he's just Reis. He's just himself. And I think Farrah teaches him throughout the book how to do that, and how to not just do it, but how to be comfortable with it, and how to allow other people to see that and be comfortable with them seeing all of him, the good and the bad and the ugly. And that's really what this whole series is about, is just embracing who you are, embracing every aspect of yourself, whether it's good or bad or ugly or beautiful. that because it's you, it's all beautiful. So I think that's really, in essence, what this whole series is really about. Something else that I really love about all three books in general was that, in the beginning, you have this map. I mean, the map is in the beginning of all three books, but I'm one that really studies the crap out of maps. I really am just such a nerd for a good map. And on this map, you see all of the courts. You see Spring Court, which is what we're introduced to first. You see the Night Court, which is what Reis is High Lord over. And then there's Autumn, Winter, Summer, Day, Dawn. I think that's all. There's all 4 seasons and then all 3 times a day. Day, dawn, and night. Yes. So, but I love that we got to see inside of all of those courts. I wish we could have spent more time like in the autumn court or the winter court, because I'm really intrigued about those types of worlds and how they're governed. But maybe in these novellas that are coming out, like there's a Court of Frost and Starlight coming out this spring, and I know there's more planned after that. So maybe in these novellas we'll get to see more into the courts that we didn't really get to see a lot into. But I'm just, especially after we met the High Lords of those courts, especially the High Lord of Winter, I just think he's so complex, and I really loved his wife. And I just wanted to know more of their story and to see more of their world. So I really hope that those different courts are explained and explored further as the story continues. But I love that we got a glimpse into every single court. And I love that we got to meet all of their different High Lords and all of their different personalities and sort of explore a little bit of what their power in that court is. The last thing that I want to say about A Court of Wings and Ruin was the character that, you kind of forgot about that came back, and that being Farrah and Nesta and Elaine's dad. In the second book, it's sort of explained that he's, out doing merchant things. He's on the continent, he's trading and everything. But in the third book, you realize that he was sort of getting alliances over there to help with this war, and for these people to come over and help them fight against Hybern and all of Hybern's army, which was massive. So I love that he was fighting with his daughters, even if neither of them realized they were fighting on the same side. And he didn't even realize that his daughters had been turned to Fae. So I love that even though he didn't know that, even though, he was still fighting for them. He was still fighting for a better world for them. And he really redeemed himself, because in the beginning, he was sort of a loser. He had lost all will to work and to take care of his family. And I just sort of had zero respect for him in the beginning. So he's a character that I think really redeemed himself in the end, who I really came to like, even though he's not in it so much. But I really did. He's one of the characters that I mourned his death, because it was their reunion with the daughters was so short-lived. So I really wanted them to have more of a reunion and more of a relationship with them. But I really think that his story was told and there was nothing else to tell. And now that his daughters are all high fae, he doesn't really fit into their world anymore. So I think it was necessary to kill off the father, but I wish he would have had a little bit more time with them, especially for Nesta, because I think she's the one that harbored the most resentment towards him and that needed that redemption. But I ultimately think in the end that she did get it. I just wish they would have had a little bit more time together. That is it for this book talk about the Court of Thorns and Roses series. I really hope that you enjoyed my review. Like I said, I gave all 3 books 5 stars. It is a series that is so close to my heart now. It's one of my favorites, probably top 5 favorite series that I've ever read. So thank you again, BookTube, for recommending this. I just love Sarah J. Maas now as an author, and anything she writes in the future, I know that I'm going to be a fan of, and I'm going to read, and I'm probably going to love it. So thank you again for recommending this author to me, and that is it for this review. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to continue discussing this with me, or if you have anything to add about what I've already said, just leave it in the comments below and I will surely respond back to you, because I just love talking about books. Bye everyone.